Have you ever heard about a genocide so brutal, so deeply rooted in racial contempt, and yet so deliberately buried from our shared memory that it's almost unknown even among historians? Picture this. You're standing in the scorching Namibian desert, the wind carrying whispers of bones crushed beneath the sand. This was once the site of mass extermination, Germany's first genocide in Africa. It happened more than a century ago, but its echoes reach forward to later atrocities that shook the world. This is the story of the Herero and Nama people and how the machinery of racial hatred in German Southwest Africa became a blueprint for horrors yet to come. Before you watch further, pause and let us know in the comments which buried story you'd like us to uncover next. Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, the Cambodian genocide under Pol Pot, or mass graves of indigenous peoples during colonization. We want your voices to guide our next deep dive. In the early 1900s, Germany, an upstart imperial power, grabbed at its place under the sun, its target, a territory known today as Namibia. They called it German Southwest Africa. They didn't just arrive, they bought land, declared sovereignty, established racial segregation, and enforced brutal policies that looked more like occupation than settlement. German settlers believed they had a divine right to the land and rationalized their actions through emerging racial theories that claimed Africans were biologically inferior, destined to serve. It was colonialism turned into ideology. When the Herero, a proud pastoral people, rose up in revolt in January 1904, it wasn't a plot to overthrow colonial rule. It was resistance against land seizures, forced labor, rape, and the annihilation of their way of life. Thousands of Herero warriors attacked isolated farms and outposts, in some cases slaughtering settlers. The uprising shocked Germany but served as the justification for a response far more devastating than anything they had provoked. Berlin dispatched General Lothar von Trotha to restore control. His plan: eradicate the Herero. He declared the infamous Vernichtungsbefehl, extermination, order stating unequivocally that the Herero must be driven from the land, shot on sight, hunted until they were gone. Women, children, elderly, no exceptions. That phrase chillingly echoes later Nazi extermination rhetoric, and it was uttered decades before Hitler's rise. Herero survivors were relentlessly driven into the Awambo region and further into the blistering Namib desert. They had nowhere to go. German troops guarded every water source. Thirst, starvation, exposure, and gunfire made the desert a mass grave. From a population of about 80,000 Herero in 1904, only around 15,000 remained by 1908. Entire families wiped from existence. Land seized. Culture shattered. Yet the Nama were also targeted. Earlier that year in October, they engaged in their own uprising led by Hendrik Witbooi. They too faced German wrath. Thousands were killed or sent to concentration camps like the one on Shark Island. Their prisoners were worked until they died of exhaustion, disease, and starvation. Unthinkably, scientists removed heads and body parts from the dead, sending them back to academic institutions in Germany to prove ideas of racial hierarchy. This pseudo-scientific morbid activity prefigured the medical atrocities of the Nazis, but again, decades before the Holocaust. These camps, the state-sanctioned killings, even forced labor, all constitute genocide. In 1908, today's United Nations definition of genocide didn't exist as law, but the systematic destruction of entire groups on racial grounds was clearly underway. And it didn't end with death in the sand. Survivors were resettled in concentration camps, their land appropriated, their freedom stolen. Generations later, Nazi leaders looked back at Namibia. They openly praised it. Known racial theorists cited the success of German actions there, the methods refined in the deserts of Africa: segregation, extermination orders, pseudoscience. Camps became templates for later genocide, the Holocaust. German society saw this as a rehearsal, a test run, tangible lessons in dehumanization, bureaucracy of killing, separation of families, and division of groups into survivors and eliminated. But Germany tried to bury it. For decades, official narratives wrote it off as colonial conflict. The German government, after World War II, clung to the narrative of the Nazis as aberration, separate from colonial crimes. Cenotaphs were removed, political acknowledgement was muted, and Herero and Nama activists remained silenced. All this while the descendants of survivors carried their trauma memories of massacres: thirst, starvation, forced sterilization, land loss, and the erasure of their language and traditions. It wasn't until 2001, almost a century later, that Herero descendants filed a lawsuit in the US against Germany seeking acknowledgement and reparations. The case was dismissed on jurisdictional grounds, but it brought global attention to the genocide. In 2004, Germany belatedly recognized for the first time that atrocities had occurred in Namibia. But in the years that followed, it carefully avoided using the word genocide or accepting legal responsibility. Eventually, in May 2021, Germany formally acknowledged that what happened in Namibia was genocide. It expressed profound regret and pledged €1.1 billion for infrastructural development in Namibia, intended in part to compensate communities affected by the crimes. But critics including Herero and Nama leaders insisted this was not reparations, no direct payments to descendants, no restitution of land or cattle, no acknowledgement of legal liability. They described it as development aid in disguise. What Germany did acknowledge the historical truth, started a difficult conversation but exposed how colonial genocides can be minimized, compensated in token gestures, or systemically ignored in global memory. This matters deeply, because genocide doesn't happen in isolation. If we ignore the past, we risk repeating it. The Holocaust didn't begin in gas chambers. It began in offices, universities, and courtrooms with the idea that some lives are biologically worth less. The machinery built in Namibia helped refine that evil logic. So why isn't this story better known? Why aren't there major films, museums, or school curricula teaching the genocide of the Herero and Nama like we teach the Holocaust, Rwanda, or the Armenian genocide? Perhaps because acknowledging it forces us to reevaluate national myths, question whose suffering matters, and face uncomfortable truths about how European empires built their wealth. But as we amplify this history, we push against that erasure. We reclaim the voices of the Herero and Nama. We restore their dignity. We say, genocide doesn't just happen in Europe. It starts anywhere racial hatred is empowered, where silence reigns over justice. Imagine if we taught history truthfully. If every schoolchild learned not just about Theodor Herzl, but about Albert Schweitzer. Not only about concentration camps in Auschwitz, but camps in Namibia. Not just about the final solution in Germany in the 1940s, but the final solution that began in German Southwest Africa 40 years earlier under the same flag, with the same ideology. That's why we made this video. To shine light, to resist forgetting, to demand that the genocide of the Herero and Nama is not a footnote but a necessary and urgent part of global memory. None of this can be erased, because in remembering Namibia, we strengthen our resolve. That voices oppressed will be raised, that stolen land will be acknowledged, that stolen lives will be mourned, that stolen justice will be pursued and maybe restored, in small part even a century later. So here's how you can help share this video. Talk about it. Tell history, not just the sanitized version, but the full truth. The massacres, the camps, the racial ideology. Because remembrance is resistance. Every view helps break the silence that allowed this genocide to remain hidden. For so long now, we come back to you. We want your voice in the story. Tell us below which upcoming deep dive you want next. Do you want us to expose the Armenian genocide under Ottoman rule? Dive into the Cambodian genocide under Khmer Rouge, or research the massed violence against indigenous peoples during colonization in the Americas. Leave your choice in the comments. Your voice shapes the future of this channel. And remember, history only begins to heal when we tell all the stories. Not some, not the comfortable ones, but all of them. Let's make sure no genocide is ever forgotten again. Thank you for watching Equal Voices Hub. We will meet again right here on the side of truth, justice, and human dignity.